And once again, as we found the drum, the kick, and the snare.
Hello, my dear listeners. It's 9th episode of AK Podcast, and today, with my friend, famous American journalist Joe Lindsley, we're going to talk about majesty of monarchy. Is it a romantic idea? Do we need majesty in our life? We're going to talk with Joe about his trip across Ukraine, how he understood that he is on the edge of the free world, and how he faced evil, clear evil. We'll talk about Maidan. Of course, Joe will tell us some his famous Washington stories. He'll talk about his dinner with Bushes and other insights from Insider. It will be interesting, and before we start, it's important to notice this episode was recorded at the beginning of the September, and now we are almost at the end of the October, and some things changed since that time. First of all, some news, they are old news. Also, Joe mentioned that it's easy to get power here, we don't have problems with it. Unfortunately, things changed, and after sheltering of our energetic objects by Russians, we have some issues with power. Russians destroyed some percentage of our energetic objects, but we are working on it, it's not a big deal. We are strong even without power. Also, I mentioned that Musk is doing bright things. It was before his tweets, which I think is not very bright action he done. And also, we're talking about Liz Truss, but today new prime minister was assigned, so again, this political news review is also a little bit unactual. But other from that, a lot of thoughts, ideas and feelings, which I think are an important reflection and interesting to hear. So enjoy 1 hour of AK Podcast now. Hello. It's 10th of September. Again, my friend, my guest is Joe today. Let's talk, Joe. Last podcast was nice, to be honest.
Andrew, it was indeed, and it was maybe a month ago, I think.
Yeah, 3 weeks.
3 weeks ago. Since then, I've been in the Carpathian Mountains briefly, and then where did I go? Odessa, Dnipro, Nikopol, across from the largest nuclear plant in Europe. Donetsk and Kharkiv and the Kharkiv suburbs and Kyiv. And now back here in Lviv on a rainy day. On rainy days, Lviv feels like London.
Yeah, that's true. To be honest, I have same feeling even though I never been in London. I had tickets once, but tickets and visa doesn't mean that you'll be there.
Yeah, you never saw the Queen.
Yeah, let's talk about Queen. Let's start from news, today's news, actual news. Stories about the Queen. Is it proper place to talk about them? Or it's not?
It's funny. I think Ukrainians are paying attention to that story, and maybe Americans would be surprised because there's a war going on here. But there's so much gratitude for Britain, especially for Boris Johnson. And as a woman I know here said to me yesterday, she said, it's sad that the Queen died, but she's very much sadder to lose Boris Johnson, even though he's still alive, but losing him as prime minister. There really was a great affection felt there.
There were a huge wave and amount of information about their help. And UK has its way of doing things, and we are happy about this way. It's good for us, for Ukrainians. But main person of this country, of this wave, if you want, is Prime Minister. And when UK doing something good for us, usually we hear Boris Johnson. It's point of focus for us, thanks to media and news. When there was this new news announced that he'll go from this position, it was very big sadness here. I think for 1 week a lot of people were very sad and they thought, gosh, there will be another person.
Yeah, but I think Liz Truss, who succeeded Boris, was been pretty strong in Ukraine. Not the same as Boris, but was pretty strong. And and I think in terms of the what the monarch gives the UK is stability, and we see that. I think we will see that even with Charles, and you recognize that. Like, look at what happened with Brexit, and for example, just take Brexit. I think it almost tore the nation apart, but because of Elizabeth, and I think even if Charles, if that happened when Charles was king, there's a binding force for the nation, and this is why, for example, I spent a lot of time in Georgia. I think we might have talked about this before, but Georgia, the country, and Russia occupies 20% of Georgia. Georgia's a small country, 4 million people or so. Russia tried to take over the entire country, and there was a strong movement to bring back their monarch, their old traditional monarchy before communist times. And there's a sense that if you have a monarchy, you have a majesty. That it's a protection for your nation. Like, it's going to be harder to erase your national identity. And so the Georgians sort of see this. And there was the French foreign minister in 1971, right after Queen Elizabeth visited France. And he said, wow, we're a bit jealous of Britain because of the monarch, they have both democracy and stability, which are two difficult things to achieve. And I've been thinking a lot about this in the context of Ukraine. Before Zelensky became president, he said, every Ukrainian is president. And when I hear some of these Americans say, oh, it's ridiculous rhetoric that Zelensky somehow is a dictator and all that. And, Ukrainians are extremely independent from their government. They're very dependent on each other and their families and communities, but very independent of the government. And I said, there's no way you can have a dictator in Ukraine. Like, you don't even listen to the cops. You have a conversation, and you solve things that way. And so Ukrainian democracy is maybe quite unique in the world.
Sorry, when you talk about it, it sounds very romantic. But what don't you think it's bad? No, not freedom, but that, like you said, Ukrainians never will stay in the flat for 2 years without seeing their grandma or something. But law is not bad idea.
Well, I think, yeah, it is. It's romantic and maybe poetic, but also some truth to it. Just as the idea of a monarchy is romantic, the idea of the America being a freedom country is romantic. I think it's not really grounded today in a lot of fact. But there is, we need a majesty to how we live, and it gives us some meaning, some national narrative. So this is what the monarch has given the UK. I think the Ukrainian national narrative. I have a friend who's a film director here. And he said Ukrainian history was always existential up until 2014, to the Revolution of Dignity. It was existential because you were always being attacked by other people, by other tribes, and you're in the middle of the East and the West, and so you were living existentially, and it was a struggle of history. But then with the Maidan Revolution, the Revolution of Dignity, Ukrainians moved from existential phase to action hero phase, and every single Ukrainian became an action hero, more or less. Like, everyone who somehow participated in the Maidan.
I was there.
You were there in Kyiv,
Yes.
So you became an action hero. You became really a part of your democracy, claiming it, sending Putin's people.
It's very strong feeling, to be honest, to be there with 1 million of Ukrainians staying in one place. Yeah, it's strong feeling.
And did you sleep there, or?
A few times we were in night shifts. Sometimes at some nights there were fights with police. They are good guys nowadays. They're doing great work today. But at that time, when it was
The Berkut.
attempts to play in dictatorship, to stop people against their will, to be free, to be in Europe, to move somewhere to the light, not to the dark. That night, sometimes they were very long and cold, sometimes they were hot, so almost no one sleep on the Maidan. Yeah, there were options, but usually you were security guard or moving some food or even a lot of wood, wood which you use to make fire in the barrel. So there were a lot of infrastructure movement with all this stuff.
Who organized all this? I mean, how was it? Was
Crowd.
self-organized?
It was
crowd.
Yes,
Crowdsourced and
crowd. I'm reading lectures in the university, and crowdsourcing and a lot of different applies of crowd power. We talk about how it can be used for science to understand society and make it better. But let's get back to the Queen's story. Is it proper place to talk about your story about Churchill and Queen, or it's better not to record
Yeah,
this?
sure. I think can I just mention, Andrew, this idea you were, I don't know, criticizing what, but saying my idea of Ukrainian democracy maybe was too romantic, but you participated in the revolution, right? Not many people get to do that in the world in human history. That's a romantic thing, right? I mean, was it not romantic to be? I mean, it was scary and tragic, but then,
I was, I think, 17 years old.
Yeah.
So just imagine this type of emotions. You with your friends, you travel from your city to Kiev, and like I'm not sure even that my parents knew about it. Maybe it's interesting. You say, I asked where did we sleep? There were a few administrative buildings we used to live there.
occupied.
It's like stigmatized word, I can say.
Yeah.
But yes, we used it for, at the end of the day, what is the main point of this government building? They should serve to people in some way, in like good society without conflicts. There are people in like expensive clothes, maybe not always, but I mean t-shirts and all this white, how you name this?
Collar.
White collar, right? And they serve the country in good times. In bad times, this building serves people place to live, to be the host. And main idea, they always should serve the country. Government should serve the country. If they don't want, at one day society will do the move, will change the government. I mean, maybe it's romantic. You're right. It is.
But why should life not be romantic? I mean, and be this great adventure. And
No,
that's
you're
what
right,
if you live
you're
in a
right,
democracy,
you're
we're
right.
all participants in this
But
drama.
I'm against of breaking laws. It's my point. I mean, you can be romantic if you want. I prefer to be romantic. But breaking the laws, it's some like border you shouldn't pass in your romantic.
Unless the law is a bad law, right? I mean, that you were breaking the law by
But who
entering
can
this bill.
decide what law is bad, who is good?
But this is I had a very interesting conversation in Odessa a few weeks ago with a great jazz maestro and a chef, and he's got a jazz club in Odessa, my friend Yaroslav, and we're talking about the Russian word for crime and punishment versus the Ukrainian idea of crime and punishment. And for Russians' idea of crime is crossing a bureaucratic line, crossing a legal line. For Ukrainians' idea of crime is something shameful and horrible that's against your nature, against the idea of goodness. So in the Ukrainian idea of this word, from what I understood, breaking a rule, let's call it a rule for now to keep it, breaking a rule could be okay, moving around the rules. But what you will not do is do something dishonorable, do something that's shameful, do something that will violate another person's dignity. And so that's very much the Ukrainian understanding. And sometimes it will mean that some laws will be broken and ignored. Whereas the Russian understanding seems to be, whatever the government says you must do, that's it, because that is the truest thing. Whereas I think for Ukrainians, and it used to be, I think, for Americans, I don't know now, the truest thing is something beyond the law. I hate it so much when I hear American politicians always saying we are a nation of laws. They say that more than they say we are a nation of free people. I think it's a problem, and I think we worship the law in America. This is why I think, the British system. You don't hear them saying that so often, and I think that the majesty, and as we see in these scenes from after the death of the Queen, everyone is their lives are part of this romantic drama. Their nationhood is something beautiful.
But I think it was for royalist people more, for people who feels distantiated from this culture of royal family. I'm not sure they feel a lot of sadness about it.
I think in Britain it's pretty widespread because this one particular person was so much a part of their life. But did you see the video? I think it was just started to circulate today of the Ukrainians about to go into battle in Kharkiv region, singing the national anthem in this beautiful glen with the light dappled through the leaves of the trees.
I've seen it in your Twitter.
Yeah, that's romantic. It's true.
That's true.
And it's like watching a movie because real life is the best movie you can ever have if you live a life of consequence. And
back to Churchill's story. Can you tell this one?
Well, yeah, it's something I've been thinking about with the death of Queen Elizabeth, and I had some experience in the UK. and because here in war, there's so many questions that become immediate. We all have to draw upon all of our experience in life, and actually, our friend, who, by the way, we're broadcasting from our friend Nicholas's wine shop, which is hopefully a tradition now. And so our friend Nicholas here asked me yesterday, what did I think of the death of the Queen? And I immediately went to a personal story. Nicholas was annoyed that I did that, but I can't help but do it because it's the most real thing I could say. And I think a lot these days about leadership and the type of leadership the world needs. And I, maybe 10, 12 years ago, I had a small research job where I worked for an English lord who was a baron in the House of Lords, and he wrote books, and I did some research for him. And I would have tea with he and his wife in Wales and in London. And his wife, her ladyship, the Lady Jane Williams, she had been Winston Churchill's last private secretary from 1949 to 1955. And so when I would have tea with Lord and Lady Williams, it was amazing, to have this connection to someone. Churchill I've always admired, even though as someone from Irish ancestry, I understand, there were some problems there. But she would tell me stories of Churchill and his leadership. And, for example, he was very difficult to work for. But she said that we all knew that he was a great man, and we knew that the country needed him. And so they put up with these things. In fact, in the show The Crown, about Queen Elizabeth, the Netflix show, there's a scene about the London fog of 1952, and they portray his secretary, which really in real life was Lady Jane, Lady Williams, and so some of the scenes of what was Lady Williams' interactions with Churchill are correct because I've heard these stories, but then they portray her dying, the secretary dying in the London fog. This is complete bullshit. No employee of Churchill died in the London fog, but the Hollywood just makes this up, and it shows you how much falsehood is in that TV show, how much falsehood is typically in Hollywood. So that's another problem, I suppose. But I had this sort of amazing sort of mentorship from someone who knew Churchill, actually, and her son is the Archbishop of Canterbury, who will be leading the funeral rites for Her Majesty, for the Queen.
Gosh.
So this was very interesting, connection to this history. And obviously Winston Churchill was the Queen's first prime minister. And so and thinking of that and thinking, Churchill had his quirks, we could say. I mean, and Lady Williams told me that he would begin every day. She said she never saw him drunk, but every day he'd have a tall, what do you call it, like a Tom Collins glass with a smidge of whiskey at the bottom and then mainly water. And then as the day progressed, that smidge of whiskey would increase. And that's, Churchill was a very depressed guy, and that's how he got through all of these.
I can understand him.
You can, yeah.
I can.
Me too.
I think it's like noir detective, hard-boiled detective idea. You know what I mean? When you have detective and main character has a story. Usually this main character is a veteran. He works as private detective, and he usually drinks a lot at the morning. He doesn't have money to pay the rent, so he usually agrees for bad orders because he need to get some money and all this stuff. He drinks. He has holes in his socks, but he but
is this a trope or a show? An actual?
It's type of novel. It's class of novel when this is general description of the main character. Hugh Laurie, who was actor in the House series, he also is musician and writer, and he wrote nice book. I think it's weapon seller, gun seller, and main character is good guy but with bad habits, let's say, and interesting past.
Yeah, and with Churchill, I mean, he, as Lady Williams would tell me, he was never. I mean, certainly he was drunk sometimes. She never saw him drunk, but that these were not necessarily bad habits because they helped him get through the challenges.
By the way, he definitely was veteran. He went through a lot of wars.
Yeah, he went through a lot of wars, and he had the weight of the nation on him. But the idea is that despite whatever flaw, and he always was hounded by what he called the black dog of depression. He called the black dog, but he had the Queen to go to. Now he was mentoring her, but actually she, in some ways, probably mentored him. She was the only, and to all of her prime ministers, And it'll be the same with King Charles, the only person they could speak honestly with. And I saw this even in the tributes to the Queen from Barack Obama, from President Obama, from President George W. Bush. I could tell, I got the sense reading their tributes to her, that she was probably maybe the only person, maybe besides their wives, probably the only person they could speak with about the burden of power that they felt as president, because that's a lonely position.
I agree.
And so the Queen played this role for the prime ministers, and including, for example, for Boris Johnson. But this got me thinking, because and maybe this is too many connections, but I feel this quite deeply. There really is a clear friendship between Boris Johnson and Volodymyr Zelensky, and there's not that relationship does not exist with any other leader right now with the Ukrainian president. And this is why I think Ukrainians really have one of the main reasons why Ukrainians have such an affection for Boris Johnson. He was one of the first foreign politicians to come to Kyiv when it was still dangerous, and he speaks from the heart, but also follows it up with actions. And I know a lot of people are angry with him at home. Maybe he should move here now that he's out of office. But there really seems to be a bond of friendship. And I saw this in what Zelensky said after Boris Johnson was removed from power. And there's a real bond. And imagine if you're President Zelensky, how do you keep sane in all this time? Who can be your true friend? And I think you need someone like the British Prime Minister. And the same way that the Queen was that type of person for British prime ministers, for American presidents, I really think that there's and I learned a lot about Churchill's wartime friendships, like his friendship with FDR, and that is so important actually to succeeding in the battle to defeat the Nazis and the Japanese.
Can you please tell about it? It's an interesting topic.
Yeah, I mean, they were pals. In fact, in December 1941. After Pearl Harbor, Churchill traveled to Washington, and he and I know a lot of this because I listened to the Churchill archives at the Cambridge Churchill College in Cambridge, and I got to listen to tapes of people that 2 days after they were allowed to be released after these people had died.
Sorry, maybe let's make it a little bit easier for listeners not from US. When you say FDR, you mean Roosevelt.
Exactly.
Right?
Franklin Delano Roosevelt,
yes.
president for 4 terms almost in the United States. And Churchill traveled to Washington.
One question about Roosevelt. Is it true that last voting when he was elected, his name wasn't in the list?
No, he was on the ballot, I'm sure.
4 times.
Yes.
Constitution gives this possibility to person.
Back then it was allowed. Simply George Washington's precedent of only running for 2 terms had lasted as sort of a common law idea until FDR. But then after FDR, they passed a constitutional amendment saying only 2 terms. So Churchill traveled to the White House, and they were meeting during the wartime, and they drank together. Probably he needed you need some friend to talk to in that time, as we've all seen during this war. There are times when you have to do that. And Churchill, according to the story, was found naked in the stairwell in the White House, passed out drunk and naked. And if we lived in a time of social media and stuff where someone might have somehow heard about that, people might say, "Oh, this is fake. This is some of the criticism I hear of Ukraine. Like, oh, this is his country, Churchill's country was under dire threat, and there he is naked and drunk in the White House. That doesn't mean that the war is fake. It actually means it's very real, and it puts incredible pressure on everyone. And FDR was one of the few people he could really open up with. And so that's anyway. All these are reflections coming from the Queen's death about leadership and how do leaders, because they're human beings.
I think it's interesting expectation from society that such type of leaders we can, maybe I can say, we don't dehumanize them. We make them as gods. I mean, we give them some properties. For example, and maybe it's not very, sweet example, but today at the morning I'm not a sweet example person. North Korea leader.
Oh, yes.
Kim Jong-un.
Tyrant asshole number 2 in the world, yeah.
So what I want to say is that there were a lot of, not news, but information in media that he don't go to the toilet. He's such type of person close to the God.
Oh, yeah.
And it was part of the media strategy, let's say. So, and it's obviously bullshit.
This is why he got so fat.
That's true.
He can never get rid of it. He can never get rid of it.
That's true. Also, I heard story.
It's all stuck.
I heard story about this guy. So there is one guy, I think in Germany, and he has farm and he selects some special type of rabbits. It's expensive, delicious food. And folks in North Korea ask him to give them some amount of these rabbits, both genders, to be able to make to create a lot of populations of these animals, because there is food crisis, it's like food insecure in North Korea, and it's true. A lot of people, and it's interesting. There are two Koreas, you know what I mean, and in one in North, people are not so tall as people in the like another part of the same country because of the food and like bad style of life, but however it's the same nation, right? What I wanted to say about rabbits, they asked him, this German farmer, to provide these animals for them to help with this problem. It's not very easy to decide, I think, but at the end of the day it's to help population stay alive, not to die without food. It's a good move. So he sent some amount of these animals, and in North Korea they use them to cook dishes for the New Year party dinner or something for the Tiran.
Oh, it's bullshit.
It's bullshit again. So it's why he is so fat, because it's not fat shaming, of course. It's Tiran shaming. Let's clarify. Tiran shaming. I don't like this type of guys. So and folks at all. So be like any type of shape you prefer. It's your decision and your life, but please don't be tyrant, because people don't like it at all. So again, about Churchill's story, sorry about interrupting you. He's drunk with his friend.
Yeah, that was all to the story. But I think it's the main thing is, and the big question now, who are these leaders that we have today? And I mean, like, Ukrainians love Boris Johnson. We don't hear Ukrainians saying how much they love Joe Biden. They say they love America, but because Biden hasn't been vigorously.
His wife was here, right?
She came to Uzhhorod, and so not to Kyiv. And I guess the American president has to be more protected. But
yes,
and this is part of what I like about the British system too. Like, Boris Johnson could go to Kyiv because he's not head of state.
Because they have a monarch.
Exactly.
And monarch is under protection, under umbrella.
Exactly.
And they have prime minister to do the shit in the field.
Yeah.
If we can say.
And more and more, I think that this is a problem with the American system.
I think in some sense, maybe, yes.
Because we worship our president as a monarch. And this changed a bit. With Trump started to break some of that. But the president could kind of do whatever he wanted, whether it was Obama or Bush.
I'm not sure. Are you sure that he won't be impeached if he does something very bad?
Yeah, well, that's what happened with Trump twice. But not necessarily very bad, but things that people didn't want to break out of the system. Maybe that's a whole other podcast conversation.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
I think so, but because it's a lot. But it is the death of the Queen and the war in Ukraine, and looking at tyrants like Putin. This is a time when we really have to think about what kind of leadership does the world need. What does it take to be a leader, and what kind of political systems do we need? And in the U.S., and the Turkish president, who I do not like at all, I do not trust, but he said a couple of days ago, he said, America hasn't been really supporting Ukraine, and America could have given 100 HIMARS, and so we could actually be in a much better position. Like, as soon as those 6 HIMARS arrived, the long-range, high-mobility rocket launchers, when they arrived in late May, that changed everything. Because up until that day, the Russians were gaining territory every single day, significant territory. And cities were falling, boom, 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 and Severodonetsk. And it seemed like that was going to be the story of the summer. But then all of that changed thanks to the long-range, high-mobility rocket launchers that only 6, and then 6 more arrived, so about a dozen, changed the war. And one of the Ukrainian officials said, if we had 50,
yes,
we could take back territory now. It was the Minister of Defense, I believe.
Okay, so it's not just a guy in the Twitter.
No, it's a high-level official.
His numbers mean something.
Yeah, and so, the U.S. support, and Erdogan, the president of Turkey, said this. The U.S. support has been slow and tepid. But here's the problem. Americans see in the media reports and I don't know if we talked about this last time, so correct me if we did, but okay, for example, one of the aid packages was $9 billion. And there's been many of these packages, right? So billions and billions of dollars. $9 billion to Ukraine. But nearly $3 billion of that was the purchase price of the weapons that were sent. So how much the American government paid for these weapons years ago, and weapons that they used in Afghanistan and other places. So they got use out of it, and then they sent to Ukraine. So the only real new money spent was the amount of money sent to ship it to Ukraine and to train Ukrainians how to use it. Then the other $6 million of that was money for the United States to purchase new weapons, which they already were going to buy anyway, but they slip it into the Ukraine package.
So you mean USA bought a weapon for USA, right? And say that it's money spent.
Yes.
Nice one.
And so now you have Americans.
Very elegant.
This is Congress. This is the bullshit of Congress, and this is what they do with everything. This is the normal behavior of Congress.
Okay.
But the unfortunate, and it's really pernicious. The unfortunate consequence of this is that your average American only sees, we gave
$9 billion,
$9 billion, $42 billion, et cetera, to Ukraine, and they think that all that money has actually come directly to Ukraine, and it's just not true. But what it does is it makes them say, okay, no more. We don't want to give any more money. But so it's false.
Are prices increasing in the US?
Yes.
Prices for like food.
I think
stuff,
much more so than here.
gas.
Actually,
Really?
Yeah.
More than here?
Yeah.
Please don't say it to US citizens. Okay, why? Because I mean, our economic it's not in very good position.
Neither is America. I mean, look, in California, you can barely get power or electricity. We have no problem with that here now. And Ukraine's at war.
Why? What is the problem in California?
It's a lot of mismanagement of resources, and that's really what it is.
Why Elon Musk like doing so bright things, but he cannot manage electricity? I mean, I know that he's not in electricity department.
But he left. He went to Texas.
Okay.
So many people.
It's too expensive, even for Elon Musk, man. What I want to say, Elon Musk has money, and even for him, it's too expensive to live in California.
Yeah.
A few of my friends were like trying or living there, and when I like hear about amounts of money you pay for like school or children garden or that, how to say? Maybe it's not like huge amount of money you can make it there.
So San Francisco firefighters and police officers can't live anywhere near the city. Many of them have to drive 2 to 3 hours to get to work.
That's a shit.
It's not a sustainable society. And this is where
it's not social friendly society.
No, even though that's all their politicians are like the liberal, social friendly people, but actually they've created horrible policies. And here's another reason why. You can call it romantic or whatever about Ukraine. This is. I think even in wartime, a better place to be. Like, as long as there's no air alarm, you are safer walking the streets of Lviv or the streets of Dnipro than you are walking the streets of Chicago or New Orleans or Philadelphia. You're not going to get mugged. You're not going to get shot. Now, when there's an air alarm, it could be, catastrophic.
Can you tell me about your trip, the last one? How long it was?
About 14 days traveling through Ukraine with a colleague from UkrainianFreedomNews.com, and I'm doing a daily radio show with Chicago's WGN, and I hadn't traveled Ukraine in like a month and a half, and I wanted to bring people with me on this journey around the country. We called it a war reminder tour to remind people of the realities of it, and I wanted to get as many good.
It was a reminder for people or for you?
For everyone, I think. But I can't forget the war here. But when you're here in the West, it's a different reality.
Yes.
Even though it still affects you in every way, especially that you can't plan for anything, but really for Americans, because we hear the same news every day. And I think part of this is maybe Russia's strategy in some ways. The same cities are shelled every day.
They are good in information
warfare
operations.
Yeah.
They are good
Very
in
good.
it.
And so when I found it on the radio every day, I was just saying, Bakhmut, Kharkiv, Nikopol shell. Well, then people get bored, even though it's not boring, it's horrible and terrible. So we took off on the road to gather some stories.
Is it the same when you heard that, for example, Aleppo was bombed? in US for you, for like, I don't know, regular one, like guy from US, American, is it the same type of Nikopol, Aleppo?
Well, that was the difference at the beginning of this war is because of social media in particular. And Americans had just recently sort of discovered Telegram.
Okay.
And so they were able to see, I think without that social media coverage, you wouldn't have the HIMARS coming to America. You wouldn't have, but it was the people stood by Ukraine because they saw what was happening in a real way. And Ukrainians are very good
So it's populism in some way for your government? Populism, I mean, they do something which people want to.
It was a political necessity that they had to do something for Ukraine.
Okay.
And I think that's part of the reason why they have these inflated aid packages. Like, oh, look at what we did. But when you're tired, you'll get tired of it soon and we can, forget about it. But when I would say the most striking places in the trap, I mean, we were in Donetsk, but the most striking places were
Donetsk region, not city.
In the region, yeah,
Okay.
but very close to the city. I guess that would be the third. I don't know if we'll have time for that story, but Nikopol, which a city I knew a few months ago, right across the Dnieper River from the Russian occupiers. In May, I brought musicians from America. We had a charity concert there, so the Russians could see us dancing and listening to music, and I hope they saw that Ukrainian joy. But that's also across from the largest nuclear plant in Europe. I was there the day that the International Atomic Energy Agency officials arrived into Zaporizhia for the inspection of the nuclear plant. And so it's very, but in Nikopol, you can be hit at any time from artillery, from the shelling. And that city, so my friend took me on a tour there during a short rail layover. And it's completely, the city's being destroyed day by day. And then the other, and I did have an incident there, which maybe we can talk about. But really the most stark thing was when we went to Kharkiv, and a city I knew before the war. And it was a city where I felt the American dream that we've lost in America was thriving. Everyone I met there said, here's my goal. In my city, in my country, I can do anything I want if I work hard.
That's true.
And now that city, so much of it is in ruins. In the center of the city, and there was a missile strike 3 blocks from my hotel, for example. I'll never forget that sound. And it could have happened anywhere. It's Russian roulette just being in that city. And the people's faces, as you see people in the streets, the staff in the hotel or the hostess in the restaurant, bewilderment, almost like they're dazed. And they're living this constant terror. And then we went to Saltivka, that northern suburb, the northern neighborhood, huge neighborhood of Kharkiv. And at any moment you could be hit by a shell. And the volunteers I was with were almost crazy, maniacal, because they're there every day. You have to be a bit crazy to be there. And the awful damage we saw, I realized that is we were at the edge of the free world. Mm-hmm. The very edge of the free world. And that's what this is all about is, can people be free? Will free people stand together?
It's very contrast place, right?
Contrast. Contrast. And fear and terror.
Fear, of course.
I don't know if I've been in strange situations, but I don't know if I've ever had such terror as I felt in Saltivka.
You have new silver hair. Is it
really?
Nicholas said it yesterday.
Maybe it came from that. It's possible. I mean, it was absolutely, to hear you shelling and cluster bombs and all kinds of things and happening all around you. Still, the old grandmas are kind of living in these buildings. They have nowhere else to go. They don't want to leave.
How society looks like there at nowadays?
I mean, you feel like you're in some apocalyptic scene. And but the one difference, and I was saying this on American radio, I stopped at a roadside cafe in Donetsk, and I felt like I was in a Coen Brothers film or a Cormac McCarthy novel. Beautiful sunny day, the hot, dusty roads and fields, and it feels like apocalypse. The sounds of war everywhere. But the one difference is the solidarity and cheerfulness of the Ukrainian people. That's amazing. Like that's what makes it not some horrible Coen Brothers or apocalyptic story. And I saw this even in Saltivka. The cheerfulness of the babusas, of the grandmothers who continue to live in these buildings. And the buildings have been shelled. Mm-hmm. They live like deep in the building where they kind of can be protected. There's Soviet concrete.
They are so robust, and I don't know what should happen for some of them to like leave their homes. They like won't be home. They will live on that place where home was.
But in a way, that they're frontline fighters, because if they weren't there, if they and I had
They
this,
are frontline livers.
livers,
Livers.
yeah, and but I think also I could say fighters, because and I had
Yes.
this debate with some Ukrainian friends saying, oh, all like these cities should be totally evacuated, but if the people left, you lose, you know.
Joe, I cannot agree with you here, because what I hear from my friends or from people who are in our army who are fighting, usually they say that civil people they don't help, they just distract you. You're trying to keep their life safe.
Yeah.
And if there is no people there, you can just like do the main work, kill Russians.
I see that, but that's why I also speak of the bravery of these civilians there.
Isn't it stupidity in some way? Not in Kharkiv, but in front line, where it's like you can be killed every day. Sometimes these people, they have children and they stay there because it's our home. I don't judge them, but isn't it stupidity to put life of your family on the on this stage?
Before even saying that, I think anyone in Ukraine could be hit at any time. We've seen,
But in front line, especially when government say you please go away.
yeah, sure. If
It's like
I understand that, but
super red, almost red, like hot orange zone. There will be like fight tomorrow, today.
I understand, and we saw this in the suburbs of Kyiv, which I also just visited,
Okay.
months ago. Those people didn't have time to get out. I mean, the government, wasn't really ready for this in many ways, right? So there's that to keep in
To
mind.
be honest, I think it's almost impossible to be ready to the war.
Yeah.
I mean, in some senses, in some places, in some areas, but generally speaking, it's like your first children. I mean, I don't have children, but I think first one, a lot of first experience is the most excited because you don't know how to do it, and war usually it's first experience of war in your life.
Yeah, and I think this is a good thing to share with the listeners, is that like the conversation we're having now is a debate I've had with friends so often the past few weeks, and this is something we have to actually think about, right?
That's true.
And this is the shittiness of war. These are very difficult questions we have to
I
face.
think we as people on the earth, I mean, we in the most broad sense which we can say, we are like all people living in the same place, and we should think about it. And to be honest, I think after World War II there were attempts to create some system of rules to prevent war, right? Big war. Maybe this is not so big as like human tried to prevent, but I mean it's big enough. What do you think? Is it possible to create some system to avoid such big wars in the future, or it's in our nature?
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I think a lot of it is in our nature, and it's not. But and this is why I was mentioning the Turkish president again, who I don't respect. But I've met Americans who stand to profit from this going on for a long time. They don't want quick Ukrainian victory. They call that escalation, but that would actually be escalation means yes, moving quickly to get victory. And they need a war to profit. My first job in Washington was working for the people that helped start the war in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Did you see film about Dick Cheney, right? Dick Cheney?
Yeah.
Did you see film about him, Power or something?
Oh, with Christian Bale playing.
Yeah.
I should watch this stuff, but I have a hard time watching it because I know too many of the people in that, and it's.
Of course, it's not 100% realistic.
Yeah, and I just don't want to relive that in some way, but.
So you was somehow connected to this historical period?
My first job in 2005, after graduating from University of Notre Dame, was working for the magazine that were the architects of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan.
But war in Iraq, I think, was for a few years at that point of time, or I'm wrong?
No, yeah, I mean, this was the war had started from 2001 and then 2003, Afghanistan and then Iraq. But I was there during the time of the surge. But no, the magazine where I worked was the ideologues there these are the people who were pushing for the war since 1997. Bill Kristol,
And these people, they were politicians, they were army generals.
They were the thinkers. They were the intellectuals that said.
But in what place in the, I don't know, social system or political system they had at that point of time?
Very influential. In fact, many people called the magazine I worked for the in-flight magazine of Air Force One.
Okay.
Because it was influential, especially in Cheney's office. And the plan for the surge was developed through the magazine. Some military theorists, published this is what needs to happen in order to turn things around in Iraq in 2006.
Really?
Yeah.
Aren't magazines and newspapers and social medias and channels just a tool for propaganda, for government to give right message in right light?
It depends. I mean, mass media can be manipulated that way, and that's a different experience I had, for example, with Fox News. But this magazine I worked for, it was small circulation. It was focused on the influential, powerful people.
Sorry, I try to understand. So small audience, but influential audience.
Exactly. That's why they called it the in-flight magazine of Air Force One.
Okay, I've got the point.
Imagine you're flying like KLM or British Airways. You have the British Airways magazine. Well, this was the magazine that people read on Air Force One. This is the magazine that people read in the West Wing.
Gosh, I think in Air Force One, it's the president's fly, right?
Yeah.
I think he or she or they read something more important than magazines, to be honest. My memes, maybe they
maybe today.
Yeah. Joe Biden
I don't think
he likes very old school memes.
I don't think he's able to read much anymore. His mind's not there. And Trump was tweeting, and it's the people.
Maybe he has some special person to tell him the most funny memes this person seen during the day.
I don't think he's even aware. I don't think his mental capacity is even
really
there. No,
really?
Definitely not. It's clear.
How it can be?
I think it's the best popular example. I mean, I've seen this for years, for 2 years at least with President Biden. But watch the interview he did with Jimmy Kimmel, the late night talk show comedian
when he
guy.
said that when this question about is Putin a murderer was asked, or it's not said?
I don't. Yeah, you can. But I didn't focus on that part of it because to me,
it's the same one.
Yeah, it was the same
Okay.
one. But there was the late night chat show host cut off the president of the United States to go to commercial because the president was rambling incoherent shit. I mean, it was extraordinary. And it was that moment when finally the sort of left wing in America, which had been saying, it's a conspiracy theory to say Biden's not mentally competent, that moment changed it. And finally you have liberals, not liberals, but Democrats saying, wait, this guy, he's not mentally there. And you can clearly, so the most clear example is that interview, but it's been going on for years.
Sorry, what you are saying? You're saying that he's not mentally health person?
Yeah.
Is ruling of USA nowadays.
Well, ruling USA is complicated because you need the Congress and a lot of things.
Okay, he's the first person in the country.
It's a very dangerous situation, especially given what we have with Russia. But I think and maybe we'll end it on this. We'll save it for another conversation. But Trump could not be controlled. In the end, maybe he was controlled a bit. Ronald Reagan ran for president. He was an outsider. Hollywood actor, then became governor of California. But an outsider from the political system, really. He becomes president. Who does the Republican Party, make as vice president? George H.W. Bush. What was George H.W. Bush's previous job? Director of the CIA. So really an inside guy. And they're like, okay, fine. The people want Reagan. And in a sense, you can see this is where, like, in some ways you have, like, the president is the queen, and the vice president is the prime minister.
Wasn't it very, very like close to the situation with Cheney?
So exactly. So that happened.
And guy who was president when Cheney was vice president, Bush, it was the son of the Bush who was director of
CIA.
Nice one.
But actually, it's flipped there because George W. Bush was a rebel from his family, and I know this because I had dinner once with George and Barbara Bush, the president and first lady.
Really?
Yeah,
Nice
and
one.
the chairman of Fox News and his wife, and their kid, and me, and President and Mrs. Bush the first. And the Bushes they're very lovely people, and that's a whole other conversation. But Mrs. Bush got mad at me, the first lady, for a different story. But they really amazing, kind people. But they were speaking ill. They were talking trash about W. They called him W. W, who had served for 2 terms. This was a few years ago. So after W was this is when President Obama was president. They were talking trash about W, like making fun of him, even though he served 1 extra term than his father. And so there was some kind of W was a rebel in a way. And when he ran for president in 1999, when he started running, and in 2000, he was against foreign wars because Clinton had intervened in the Balkans, and W's main campaign plank was no more interventionism. That was his whole shtick, and the people voted for that. But then he gets the nomination because the people supported what he said, and the party and his parents and the party came in and said, okay, well, you need Dick Cheney to be your vice president. Dick Cheney, who was Secretary of Defense under Nixon, who was a war guy, he's got to be your vice president. And Cheney influenced the course of the Bush presidency. So Bush was an anti-war guy. And then President Obama, Barack Obama, then senator, runs for president, anti-war guy. Let's get the hell out of Afghanistan and Iraq now. That was his whole campaign. A big part of it, not all of it, but a big portion of it. He gets the nomination. Who do they make as vice president? The guy that ran the Senate Foreign Relations Committee that was involved in and supported all these wars, Joseph R. Biden, becomes Obama's, and then Obama was transformed. You know, they're like,
Gosh, I don't want to be conspiracy theorist, right? But you mean that it's interesting balance, and what people see and what stays behind what they see, it's always balanced by powers.
well, for example, we started this conversation talking about how the Queen or the monarch in the UK performs a lot of that role by mitigating, being some kind of check and balance with the Prime Minister. And in the US, we don't have it like that, but there's an unnamed. Yes, I mean, I think the examples I just pointed out, you can just clearly look at that, and at least we can ask questions about it. Like President Obama and President Bush II were both anti-war, and then they changed so much. And then President Trump, when Donald Trump was running for office for president, he was also anti-war. And actually, he was the first president out of all those guys to not start a new war, amazingly.
Did Obama start?
Yeah, Obama started military interventions in Libya and Syria, right? I believe. And Trump resisted that. He did do some targeted attacks on Iranians and others. But who did the party make Trump's vice president? Mike Pence. Mike Pence was very close to the neoconservatives, the war party of the war sector of the Republican Party. My first interview when I worked for that magazine, the Weekly Standard, that pushed for Iraq and Afghanistan wars, was with Mike Pence when he was just a congressman. He was groomed by these people, and they thought, okay, the people want Trump. Well, we got to control him somehow. We got to get him into our system. Mike Pence is vice president, but Trump did whatever he wanted, and Trump and Zelensky had that phone call where they were beginning to cooperate. Zelensky had just maybe several weeks before that phone call, he'd hired as his press secretary a woman who had been a reporter for the New York Times. She was Ukrainian, but she had broken a story in the New York Times about Joe Biden's family's corruption with pro-Russian interests in Ukraine. So Zelensky knew something about this. He and Trump were poised to start working together, and then Trump was impeached because of that phone call. And because of that, then Trump could not stop communicating really with Zelensky. And Zelensky and Trump are both kind of outsiders. And I think that there's a lot of questions we need to ask about how, who's trying to affect and control these things. And now we see, after the wildness of Trump, and yeah, he was unpredictable and uncontrollable. Also, Dorechi, by the way, like Ukrainian people are in their democracy are unpredictable and uncontrollable. And now, no wonder, I think, we have a president and a vice president who are not super mentally sharp in different ways. And we very rarely hear their voices. Like we hear Boris Johnson speaking clearly. You hear the president of Estonia, Latvia speaking clearly about this war.
What do you think about Zelensky, his speeches?
I think it's fantastic.
It's fantastic. I agree with you.
And maybe fantastic. It's fantastic. Could sound like a fantasy. It is real leadership. You can see the change in how he looks.
Yes.
And now he is an
But
actor.
I think it's also work of the team.
You need a team. No, it's like Churchill the same, and projected an image. You had to, and this is normal. And Zelensky, and maybe you did need an actor to be in this role,
But actor will do it great.
Yeah, and so
I think Shakespeare said he is playing stupid person better than stupid person can play.
yeah.
And it's not about our president, he's not stupid person, I'm just telling about his actor skills and skill to make great speech.
But even like before the war, even though he was an actor, we didn't see that from him. And the war has summoned him to this. And I think, and this is why I also like what I see as the friendship between Boris Johnson and Zelensky. The war makes you more serious. And for all of us, like in all of our lives, here in Ukraine, we have to answer things more intensely and more quickly. And I've seen that seriousness from Zelensky. And part of that can't be acted every day. I think even with a great, because he's very different than what he was before the war. And we cannot underestimate the fact he could have fled Kyiv. Yanukovych fled Kyiv, the pro-Russian Putin guy, in 2014 because of a lot of protesters in the streets. Zelensky had much more of a serious, dire threat to his life, and he could have, and would have had a lot of sympathy around the world, but he didn't, and that one act can never be discounted.
I agree.
Yeah.
Do you have story about hope? I think our podcast is moving to the end of this episode, and I want to leave some, good flavor in the ears of our listeners.
Well, I think we talked earlier about the difference between Americans, when you say, how are you, and Ukrainians, how are you? And I think I have to answer in the Ukrainian way because after seeing what I saw in Kharkiv, at the edge of the free world, I felt very empty, very, very empty. And it's a dread, like a dread I still feel in my soul, which it's not a total emptiness because I'm all the more inspired to make sure we keep fighting. But it's to see how there could be such evil, which we know about, you can read about.
So you faced clear evil?
Yeah, that's what I felt. Yeah. Where evil was just inches away from us.
How did you feel it?
As you hear the Russian missiles and shells raining down on Saltivka, and then I see the damage they've already done, and I look at the bewildered, and it was bewilderment. I don't know how you would say that in Ukrainian, but like a more intense type of confusion, almost confusion and terror combined in people's eyes.
Close to panic?
Panic, but even a deeper panic, so they're not like almost bordering on despair. But I could see it in their. I remember as I'm talking to you, I can see the faces of people I encountered through my time in Kharkiv, and even before I saw it in their eyes, even before I saw the horrible, horrible stuff, because it was so apparent in their eyes, and I think anyone could recognize that. And for example, this one woman I saw walking down the street, and it was not just her. She represents a lot of people I saw there. So, because it's not just an outlying situation. And she's walking down the main boulevard of Kharkiv toward the Maidan, the main square. And in her eyes was such sadness, and she's looking around at all the destruction around her. And she looked so lost and alone and afraid. And that was what I saw in so many people's eyes. And it was the hotel staff as missiles are raining down and they hit a few blocks from us, but they could have hit us. And the staff is, looking out the window, sort of timidly looking up at the sky. And there's this, this is why the most important thing I can finish with is saying, this is the free world under threat. These are free people under threat, good people under threat. And if whoever doesn't fight with this is okay with evil taking over, and it's going to keep spreading. And it is everything we hear about never again, blah, 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 from previous wars. We're letting this happen again still. And 6 HIMARS, I'm sorry, America. It's got to be 100. Just do it. Get it done. And I know there's a fear of the nuclear stuff, and Putin's holding that over everyone. But you know what? Let's make Putin afraid of us. That's the only way you can beat these guys.
I agree with.
That's the only way you can beat them. And this is one maybe it was a good thing about, a crazy wild-eyed tweeting president. It's like, you don't know what he's going to do. And the world needs that type of leadership. It's the only way you can stand up to Vladimir Putin.
I agree with you. We need strong leadership today.
And crazy people like Churchill.
I think it's time to say thank you for listening. Please comment this stuff. More important, share it with your friends. We'll meet once more at least, or a few times, and talk, because we cover only 2 items in my list and we have what to talk about more. Thank you for interesting stories, for sharing your experience. It's important.
Andrew, thank you. UkrainianFreedomNews.com. You can follow my stories, and just go to UkrainianFreedomNews.com, and however you access all that stuff, you can find there.
And donate. Don't hesitate. Don't be shy.
We need drones,
Send money.
especially.
Please share this information and doing good things together to win and to be in the better world than we are now.
Indeed. Andrew, thank you, man.
Thank you, man.
Дякую.